Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Research Thing meetup. For some of you, I can say welcome to your first Research Thing meetup, because I had a quick look at the attendee list and I saw that over 100 of you are first timers, and that's really, really great. And we're happy to have you, but we're obviously equally happy to have all the old heads that have been with us, probably in person. So just a quick thing about the meetup. We have started in 2011 in London because we felt there were a lot of UX and design meetups, but no dedicated research meetups. So yeah, we have around 3 events a year, and we're always looking for interesting new topics and speakers. So if you're interested in speaking, we'll coach inexperienced speakers, and we also happily have experienced and very experienced speakers on here. So just get in touch. We're also still looking for speakers for the next event that we'll potentially have in September, and that one's going to be around user research and behavior change. So get in touch if you're interested via our Twitter handle or on LinkedIn. So the Twitter handle is right there. It's @ResearchThing. And if you're interested in tweeting, then please use hashtag B2B research. We also have Rick with us, who's tweeting from our account. So if you have any questions, or you just want to retweet what he says, feel free to do that. Any exposure is great for us and for our sponsors. So the obligatory 2 things about our sponsors. So we have Zebra People, and for those of you who are in the UK, they're a digital recruitment agency, and I talked to Ben today, whose email I've listed here as well, and he said that he actually has new roles just on his desk. So they're perm and contract roles for user research. So if you're interested, reach out to Ben. But he's also always very happy to help with, updating your CV or general chats. So they're really a friendly bunch of people who'll help you land your next job, and yeah, get in touch with them. And then we also have the UXPA UK, and we're super grateful for them because they're supporting us with this webinar. And they also have an upcoming event in August that you might want to sign up to, whether you're in the time zone or not. I only have the UK time zone, so that's 6:30 p.m. on the 20th of August, and it's about research ops before and after COVID-19. So it should be really, really interesting. So thanks to Zebra People and UXPA for helping us with putting this event together. Without further ado, I want to introduce you to our first speaker, who is Gabi. And Gabi's going to talk about herself and introduce herself and where she works. But I just want to say, so I've been working with Gabi at Babylon Health since she joined. And it's a real pleasure. She brings that Brazilian fire to everything, and is a researcher who always asks why and questions everything. And yeah, it's just an amazing colleague and an amazing researcher. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing, and Gabi can take over.
Thank you so much, Anya, for the lovely introduction. Yeah, so hi everyone. I am Gabi. I work with Anya at Babylon Health, and I'll be talking mostly about my experience doing B2B research there for one of our internal tools. So before I start, for the ones, I don't know if everybody's familiar with Babylon Health, but our mission is to put affordable healthcare in the hands of everybody on Earth. So we offer different sorts of digital telemedicine services, such as video appointments. We also have AI-powered chatbots, symptom checkers, and other features in a mobile app. And I worked as a user researcher for one of our internal tools for around 9 months until I moved teams. And that's what this presentation is about. But before I talk about it, let's talk a little bit about my background. As a user researcher, I started my career being a journalist. So I worked as tech journalist for around 6 years in my home country, in Brazil, covering international events, but focusing in Latin America. So I was already very familiar with the B2B world and writing about case studies, implementations, companies, but the heavyweight IT, like mainframes, cloud computing. When I started working as a user researcher here in London for a B2C product, you can see here, it's an app called City Mapper. I don't know how familiar you are with it as well, because the event is remote. So I can tell that this app is very popular here in London. It's an urban mobility app. And it's pure B2C. It helps people navigate in big cities. I was really excited because I could transfer a lot of my soft skills from journalism, but talking to people about their real needs and doing something meaningful that would solve their problems in their day-to-day life, and people that would actually choose to use the app that I was working for. But then at Babylon, I was presented with the challenge of help building the portal in which our internal teams and in the future partners will set up partnerships. So yeah, it's like, oh no, I'm back in the B2B world. Everything is difficult again, right? So where did I start? I think as a researcher, the desk research for B2B is also very important, but internally, I would say that there are some other unconventional sources of information when we do desk research. The users are normally already speaking up, both internal users, in my case, but also in the external users related to the industry that I was researching. As the same way that I was writing for a niche B2B IT publication in Brazil, there is a publication for the sector that you are building a product for that's writing about the issues with the nitty-gritty granularity that you need to get familiar with. In my case, there is this website called Employee Benefits that had a lot of information that got me familiar with the language, what are the main topics that people are talking about in the industry. As well, tools such as LinkedIn provide groups in which people discuss the problems that you want to hear them talking among themselves. So not to you as a researcher, but like how do they talk and how do they interact? That will also help you inset your mind in work context in that environment. And obviously, because I was building a product internally for Babylon, we use Slack. And I found Slack as one of the most powerful tools to understand my users, even before I reach them. Slack is an open communication tool, so the rooms are public. So that's where you get to see people asking for help, talking about things that they've done, talking about things that they can't do for any dependency without any interference of anyone. Obviously, I am aware that there are private channels, probably where users are more honest and they would just talk more about their pain points, but just having access to the open ones is a great resource that will put your mind into place before you reach them out. And then you get to know them a little bit better, and you can reach them out in order to understand who they are, what they do, what they like, the usual persona work that we do when you work with B2C. But also, because you are building for something that they are going to use at work, you need to know things as like, what makes them feel good, what are the other tools they use, how different the team members are, and also things like, what are the people that actually dislike each other and why? What is the problem they are actually trying to solve? Who is preventing them to achieve what they need to achieve at work, right? And these are the questions that you can't really ask, and these are the questions that are not going to be on a public Slack channel. So how do we get there? How do we get to know the answers for these questions and figure out the problems that you are trying to solve? Trust is something that is very important, even when you work within the same organization. Because even though I was building something, I was helping building something for our internal users, and we had ultimately the same goal, people can feel a little bit watched, right? If somebody is just asking too many questions about the things that don't work, about their mistakes, about things that we need to learn in order to find the pain points to help the designers do their best job. So I spent a few weeks, I would say around at least 3 weeks, just in this process of building trust before I get to know, before I get to do the main piece of my research. Some would say that it slowed us down in the beginning. I had some pushback from the PM, but after that barrier was surpassed, the results really paid off. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how I built that trust with my users. So the first thing, creating rituals and showing that you care, proved to be very important. Now, rituals, the definition of a ritual is something that happens regularly in the same way. In the research, we know that we cannot do exactly in the same way, but if you find some sort of structure in a ritual, people will be expecting you, and it helps them feel a little bit more secure, and you feel more reliable to them because they know what to expect. So when I was in that team, I was, it was before Corona time, so it was in the office, so even helped having the sessions and having like some time with them in the same room because they knew where to go. And even bring snacks that they like. It's like, hey, you know, we're meeting in a bit, so going to the shops. Do you want me to bring something? What's your favorite chocolate? It helps ease them out and also it shows to them that you care. A few things that worked: having a weekly slot on the same day of the week. Scheduling this coffee chat. So if I have a slot in the middle of the afternoon with them, it's like, you know what, like instead of just going there, would you like us just to go for a walk and get some coffee? Use this as a day to show their things firsthand, and even brainstorming ideas for a problem that they have that might not be a priority, but you are just letting them speak. And we know that when we listen, people are very open to talk about themselves and the things that bother them. If you listen to them and make it clear, just do not raise expectations that things are going to be solved, but you want to understand what they are going through. A few things that normally don't work is just creating another Slack channel that will feel just get buried among all the communication that they already have. Prototyping, testing every week. As much as my designer really wanted to test something every week, that gets really tedious and repetitive. And any sort of Jira style ticketing system, everything that will put your users in a queue to get access to you will have some weird reactions because you want them to feel that they can trust you, they can reach you at any time. When you have these rituals in place, it makes it much easier to find who your super users are. That's a little bit different, I find, than when we work with B2C products, because in a workplace, people deal with pressure very differently. And it's not that you are designing for different sets of users and different sorts of expectations. People don't get to choose the tool they use most of the times. They just have to use what you are researching. So people have their own structures and reporting lines. You will find your super user as being the person who is more relaxed in dealing with pressure and more open about talking these kinds of issues because they know that you will not, you treat the information they give to you with confidentiality, and you are actually using it to improve the product that you are building. In my case, obviously, there was this bonus. Once I got them to understand that we had the same goal because we were part of the same company, things became much easier. But even so, in the group that I was researching, it was a group of around 10 people, I had only 2 super users because these were the people that would be very open about everything. And they are the ones that will connect you to the industry and all the other B2B users. They are the ones that will take you to events, they're going to connect you with their clients, they're going to talk about the market, and they will also talk about all the gossip in the company, the things that you don't even dream about. They will give you all the information. And that's when you are finally good for shadowing. And I know that when we talk about B2B research, if you just, read a lot of Medium articles, they are going to talk about shadowing. Spend a day with your user in their day so you get to see their real world. But I would only recommend doing that after you build trust, because again, that's a workplace. You are not going to observe the reality if people feel watched, if you are there to point their mistakes. Easily pain points will infer on mistakes, and in a workplace, people are being assessed because of them. So shadowing for me only happened after I built that trust relationship because they knew I wasn't there watching anyone. And also I started mindfully. One of the first opportunity that I got to do some shadowing it came up with the user herself. She just like, oh, I have a call. Maybe you just want to sit in this call. Maybe you just like instead of like us chatting, then she just told me the whole problem that she was going through with that particular partner. And it's like, and then you'll understand why I can't do what I need to do. So shadowing sometimes can only be that, just for a few hours before you get to spend a full day with your user. And how do you know if things are working? Well, in my case, when they started coming to me to try to solve anything related to the product, even if it was something that we had no power, I felt like, okay, so these people now really trust me because I am the point of contact. So even if the solution for the problem was, oh, you're just gonna have to file a Jira ticket for our IT department, they knew that they would come to me to vent. And that's also when I got some very valuable information about their needs and how to do their work and their pain points. And here's a few examples, like anything, things that were completely out of my scope, such as only things that engineers can do, or things that were related to senior stakeholders' decisions. I was the point of contact because when the users thought about partner portal, they came to me. And that's it. Unfortunately, I cannot show the product that I was working on because it's an internal product and that's confidential. But it's like a web software for internal teams, and in the future will be open to external ones. Anya and Sweta, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions yet. Guys, we'll give you like 1 minute to start asking any questions. You should have a Q&A feature, or you can use the chat if you can't find it. Did any of the panelists have any questions you wanted to ask Gabby?
Sorry,
go on.
Yeah, I was curious just to ask about, I think you said that you spent like 9 months on this particular product, kind of doing this particular research. I was like, that's much longer than I ever get to spend researching something. So I was just curious if you can talk a bit about that amount of time and kind of pros and cons, or kind of why, yeah, what was right about that kind of 9-month time period.
9 months is almost as if like a baby is ready. Yeah, so in the beginning, I didn't know that it was going to be so long. I joined the team and people wanted insights straight away. So I also used a bit of some strategies to just, like, as I was talking in the beginning with the desk research, when they would come up with a few questions, I would just look, you know, in the communications and just display to them, like, look, you know, some of the answers that you were looking for, we can get evidence here. Look at this communication, look at what's going on. That's also happened when I got the trust of the team to do the things that I wanted to do, such as creating these rituals and making sure that people trust me before I can go and dive deep in. I think the main advantage of being, and I knew that I would be in this team for a little bit longer, even though I didn't know how long it would be. And the main advantage is that you get to learn so much when you go deep on the same project, that at some point, other teams that had associated features with the partner portal would just come to me and ask me, like, oh, can you explain how people use that? Because they were mostly backend engineers, because I was spending so much time with my users that I could, like, quickly understand and explain things really fast to the team. That gave so much velocity to make things ready. Definitely an advantage. I guess the main disadvantage is that this trust process, until it happens, you are running in the dark, right? Because it's like when they just have to be very mindful when you are staying that long. It's like, how do you read the person? Like, that this person trusts me. How can I push a little bit the boundary and ask them about, you know, this particular incident that I know created a lot of tension? But the team is great. Like, I'm very happy when I get to meet them in other, now that I moved teams, I'm not working in this tool, but when I get to meet the team members of the commercial team, I get really happy because they really embraced user research and saw it as part of their day-to-day work.
Mm-hmm. we have several questions come through. I'm first going to allow Lena, who had raised her hand, to ask your questions. I'm just going to allow her to ask the question.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay. I just wonder if the genesis of the interaction or the relationship started with an engagement team or a product owner, and you took it from there, or was it your own good self who went out to the internal team and tried to establish a relationship right from the get-go? Was there someone before you who opened the doors and you took it from there? That is my question.
Yes, I always used introductions. So I would chat around in the team that I was part of and say like, hey, do you know this person? Can you intro me to this person? And that would work much better. But sometimes I needed to reach people out that I didn't have anyone I was working with that could introduce me. But I guess one of the advantages of working for a company like Babylon is that everybody's really open. So I would just reach them out directly using the Slack, saying, hey, I'm Gabi, I'm doing this and that. And then this first interaction, we don't really have an engagement scene in that sense. But then this first interaction would be like, do you have a 15 minutes for a chat? I'll meet you in the kitchen. I guess in these days on Zoom would be like, do you have 15 minutes for us to chat? Just want to introduce myself and things that I'm working on because I think you might be interested in it. So less about asking them and more about just showing yourself and your work so that they feel like, oh yeah, you know, this person does that. It can be relevant to what I'm working on.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lena. So now we have some more questions. What is the difference in B2B research in healthcare to another field? Is that something you can answer?
Yeah, I'm not really sure if I can answer that because I've only done B2B research in healthcare. When I was at Mapper, I did mostly with urban mobility, and then I touched the different sides of it, but never did B2B with them.
Yeah.
I think maybe we can, sorry, Smeta, maybe we can pick that up after Calen's talk as well, because then we also have something to compare that to.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout. Cool, and then there's another question. I'm going to try to read it correctly because it's a long question. This is from Heather. In terms of not pushing prototypes at them, is your setup such that you don't want to use up your research informants, or is it just not what you want to find out?
It was more not to tire them out with prototypes every time. In my case, and I think in a lot of in B2B scenarios, because we work with technology, we have some familiarity with technology and we understand what a prototype is. And I've quickly found out that people have different reactions to prototypes. Some people don't really understand that it's not a functioning product and things are going to behave a little bit weird. And it's fine because, and actually it was great to see how attentive they were to details because they caught things in our prototype that we didn't. Just like, you know, the information that wasn't matching, and then we were like, oh my God, yes, this information is really useful because they went so quickly through these screens and they noticed that. So we would just use prototype testing when we really need it. And we, after speaking with the users, the designer was always involved both in interviews and prototyping. So after speaking with them, I would debrief with the designer and the PM. I would record the sessions. I would just treat it as a normal user research session. And even if I had some particular journey in mind, I would be very mindful of when to push a prototype to them. And then we had a setup, just like any other prototype session. It's a web tool. So we had a computer with a tool, and then they would log in, and then people would be observing in an observation room. And yeah, and then the session was recorded and I had a note taker with me.
Cool. We have two questions from an anonymous user. We have loads of questions. I'm gonna have to pick some, sorry guys. One question, which I think is really good. Did you have any difficult situation when building trust with your users, and how, like, did you overcome them and how?
Yes, so yes, I did. I had some users that just wouldn't trust me. And even when doing the activities that I was suggesting, you could see that they were kind of like skeptical of like, just like, why am I wasting my time with that? And I think you overcome these just by showing results. In the beginning, it's hard, but then you try to figure out how can I wow them. One of this particular user, we just wowed them just like showing a prototype that in the end it became unrealistic because we were not able to build it straight away. But when he saw what we had envisioned based on what he had said to us, like he's like, oh yeah, oh yes, like you understand, that's exactly it. Another thing that really helps is just to figure out their language and how they communicate. The same way that when we are communicating research to stakeholders, we need to adapt the level of information and how you communicate that, considering the role of the stakeholder in the organization. When you do B2B research, I would definitely recommend the same thing. If you are dealing with someone in a more senior position that's more used to meetings and will feel more comfortable in a meeting setting, I wouldn't even mention that this was like a user research session. I would say meeting, let's go and just sit down and have a meeting, because that was their comfortable zone. And even though for me it was an interview, because I was taking notes, I was recording everything, and I was, just doing like a structured interview, for the user, it was like, oh yeah, it's just like a meeting, and that helps in breaking this barrier in the beginning.
There's one more question by the same person. What was the pushback from the project manager, and why did they push back?
The pushback is because we need to deliver. We need to build something. We don't have time for this. But then you just pick your battles, right? It's like, okay, let's just like figure out how to do tactical in the beginning. So you join, and you also, help the PM here. And in parallel, you run the strategic and the building trustful relationships that you want to do. So yeah, that was pushbacks. Classic tech company.
So maybe we have time for one or possibly two questions. What would be a biggest challenge for delivering a B2B research for you, and why? This is by Johnny.
Yeah, so I can answer that in a context internally, because my context was very specific. I was dealing with a commercial team that had relationships with our clients and partners. So in that context, the biggest challenge was to make sure that I also get access to their network of contacts without hurting their relationship with the partners and clients. Because internally, it's much easier to communicate internally that why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I'm asking about mistakes and pain points. We work for the same company, we have the same goal, but when we are dealing with clients, there are other issues that relates to that. There are SLAs you have to meet, and we have a contract obligation, and we also want to look good, right? Like, and we also, like, it's a different sort of like relationship, and in the end of the day, I represent Babylon. So that was really challenging, but I think it went well. The same way that I was, when like in calls that I was shadowing, I could see that my user would be like, hey, just so you know, I have someone else listening to this conversation, and she's working in improving our processes, and things were fine until we found, like, particularly one client, one individual that helped me a lot, because he was a client and he was very open to talk about things that went well and things that didn't go well. But it was challenging, took some time to get there.
Amazing. And I have two kind of overlapping questions by Naomi and Monica. So I'm going to try and combine it. So one was, how do you manage the noise that comes with individual Slack DMs containing individual feature ideas? And also, like, did you end up becoming some sort of customer support person as part of dealing with all of that? And a different angle to this question from Monica is, how did you bring the project relationship to an end after building all that rapport and trust?
I love the first question because at some point it really feels like that. Yes, I think personally, I think it's worth going the extra mile on this one, especially in the beginning of the relationship. I actually got to solve one problem in particular that they had, just helping them coordinating with another team, because that helped a lot. I would just use, so I have a way of dealing with my chaos as a researcher, that I have a parking lot. So I would just try to read everything. I would prioritize my super user messages, not everyone, just have like a parking lot of ideas and a graveyard of ideas that I had already discussed with my team and knew that things wouldn't work. Surprisingly, like as any sort of user, you're going to have a few individuals are going to reach out a lot to you, and most of them, they're chill, they're quiet, they're not going to be reaching out all the time. So yeah, in my context, it was challenging, but it wasn't that big of a problem. And when this relationship came to an end, I think it's both ways. It's just like when people leave the company. I remember one of my super users left, and I was so upset because it was so great to work with her. I was like, damn it, like I had used this. It's also a risk, right? When you do B2B internally, because people can leave, people can just go to another job. And I was like, oh my God, I lost one super user, I can't believe it. But yeah, it's fine. When I left, I always showed myself as like, we are colleagues, we are work colleagues, I'm still here, we can still talk. And they got so much into user research that they're like, oh, if you're ever testing other features in the app, and if you want my opinion, just get in touch. So I think this is a win.
Cool. There are lots more questions, but I think we need to stop now, right, Anya?
Hold on, sorry. Yeah, I think it'd be good to give Calen the chance to speak as well.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you for the virtual microphone to Calen. Calen, the stage is yours.
Well, I'm going to quickly introduce Calen, just because I introduced you, Gabi. So Calen and I actually have never met, but I have met so many other people from the same company that he's working at, Stripe Partners. And they're all like a really great bunch of people, a lot of them anthropologists like myself. And yeah, they're doing really interesting research, but I'm sure Calen, you can take it away and you can talk about that a little.
Sure. Yeah. First, yeah. Thank you for those very kind words, and thank you both for having me on this evening. I'll just share my screen and get my presentation up. Great. I'm just trying to move the video out of the way, and I can't seem to figure out how to do it when I'm presenting in Keynote. Ah, there we go. Okay, that sort of works. Okay, great. Yes, so into the wild office, lessons from studying people at work. Okay. So yeah, a little introduction to Stripe Partners. We're a strategy and innovation consultancy based in London. As Anya mentioned, lots of anthropologists, so that's the background of most of the consultants. In essence, means that we just do all of our research, or did our research prior to COVID, primarily in depth with smaller sample sizes, in the context of what we're trying to study, and in person, of course, prior to the pandemic. That's a lovely photo from one of my colleagues' projects studying people in a flavor factory, so scientists working with flavor. And the projects are largely generative and exploratory research, kind of to inform where the opportunity lies and kind of what needs might be met. Yeah, I think it's good contrast with a lot of what Gabby was talking about, because we are working for clients and doing our research for clients, typically trying to understand people from lots of different businesses in a given study, and quite early on in the product pipeline. So we're not, for the most part, dealing with prototypes or doing kind of that user testing per se. For me personally, I've really found that kind of these projects around people working and at work have been a focus of mine in the last couple of years, particularly about understanding how people collaborate and how they use tools to do so. So things like understanding remote working a long time ago, before everyone was doing it, for augmented reality and virtual reality, how people collaborate asynchronously, project on devices that are just for video calling. Recently done a lot around small and medium-sized businesses, so kind of qualitative research prior to a quant segmentation. And currently looking at kind of new ways that people, when they're remote to each other, collaborate in ways that have kind of less friction than calling someone up. So things like leaving calls on in the background, or a few platforms where you can kind of hit one click and immediately start a call with a colleague. And a lot of this has been in Europe and the US, but also around the world. The segmentation in particular was 6 countries, so a good amount of international context and variety as well. I've really loved doing this research around work, and I'm really glad that it's kind of been something that I've been focusing on. I think as a researcher, we probably all know the experience of researching a topic that your participants don't have much to say about and don't care much about. That tends not to happen when you're asking people about their work and their job. They like talking about it, even if they're complaining about stuff. As I'm sure you saw, Gabby, they tend to do that pretty passionately, and it's pretty invigorating and exciting to talk about. I really like that the end outcome is about ultimately improving people's lives, helping them get things done more effectively and with less friction. It's not to try to just sell more of something. And lastly, kind of with the methodology that we have at Stripe Partners, and having a background in anthropology, like methods of ethnography and observational research really add a lot of clear value when studying how people work. Kind of contrasting this to, in the past I've done research testing pilots for TV shows, where people watch the TV show and tell you if they liked it or not. It's something, when people are sort of giving that opinion of whether they like something or not, they can just tell you, yeah, I liked it, no, I didn't. When people are talking about how they get work done and the platforms that they use, often people will say, yeah, I use a lot of this program or that program, or say that something is really easy or they do it all the time. And then if you actually watch them, you'll go into that certain platform and see it's like there hasn't been any activity in months, or something that they described as something that they do quite easily actually has a lot of challenges and places where they get tripped up or confused. And so I think it's something where, really watching people do it is often really necessary to understand kind of what's getting in people's way, or what are they actually not using so much, even if they kind of feel like they use it a lot. That said, there are definitely a clear set of challenges, and I think most of what I have to say today is about these challenges, for better or worse. Often I found it's kind of a very specific target or type of behavior that you're looking to study, especially if you are layering needing people of a certain role, say an IT decision maker at a certain type of company, say SMBs. If you layer onto that, the usage of a particular platform, it just becomes, a very granular audience, a really granular target sample that you're going after. That has a whole host of challenges just in terms of finding people. Often companies or individuals have concerns around confidentiality of research. A lot of companies don't allow people to participate in external research, for good reason. I absolutely understand where that's coming from. When it's kind of, you need buy-in from a company, or you want to talk to multiple colleagues, that often means multiple people need to kind of agree and buy into it. So it might be a manager and some of their reports, or a few peers, or someone in HR needs to sign off on it. Either way, whenever you have multiple parties, again, it just adds an exponential factor of kind of difficulty getting people into an actual study. And when it comes to incentives, it still helps. People still respond to financial incentives. But I've often felt that it's less so than in consumer research. I think this is particularly true if you're looking for management or like leadership and decision-making roles. And I think, it's pretty understandable that if you have a higher income participant, it's harder to persuade them with money. And also kind of as people are busier and busier, it's also harder to get their time. So it's, out of this kind of accumulation of these challenges is most of what I'm going to be talking about. Suffice to say that the recruitment is always challenging and unpredictable, and often it feels like kind of asking a favor or a bit of begging in B2B research that is more than I've typically encountered in B2C. I think also a lot of our expectations for how research works and how it's set up come from B2C research. Setting up a really particular couple of dates where you're going to do the exact same methodology. It's going to be an hour for everyone, and you're going to get 25 of your exact target in there. They'll complete a homework beforehand. A lot of consumer research is set up in these way, with this kind of very strict and clear expectations. Related to what I was just saying, I think in B2B research, we often don't have the kind of power dynamic to make these sort of demands on participants, and ultimately we need to be a lot more flexible. Just to tell a quick anecdote on one of the first projects that I did, which was about remote work. We spent a long period at the beginning of the project, before we got into recruitment or field work, trying to kind of iron out a hypothesis, which was that remote workers that had a lot of support from their companies would have really different needs and device setups and pain points from remote workers who had high support or that had low support from their companies. But this got us into a situation where we were saying, okay, well, really, what should be our benchmark for high support versus low support? So we made a Google form survey and sent it out to 50 some people at different companies, trying to kind of understand where that benchmark fell for high and low. And there was like weeks of back and forth about this definition, all to then get into the study, and really struggled to just get companies to participate. And at the end, we were really just taking anyone that we could get into it in terms of companies. And like, we had long forgotten about this distinction of high and low support, and it didn't come through at all to the final presentation. And we found kind of more or less that even if people's companies had different policies, like, they largely had quite similar pain points. And it's just to kind of make the point of, trying to outline from the beginning exactly what you're going to see, and not being flexible about that can really wind up costing you a lot of time. And ultimately, the challenges of it will force you to be flexible, whether you really want to or not. And so I think what I've really learned is that it's about shifting from these demands of our research to what the opportunity is from each potential participant. And this is really something that I take into the proposals that I work on and the clients that I work with. It's a lot about the framing of the project. But when I kind of hear things along the lines of someone doesn't fit perfectly the recruitment criteria, or if someone can't participate at a certain date, or maybe they can't do kind of a homework aspect as well as, you know, multiple interviews, if that's what the ideal methodology is, instead of sort of disqualifying them and just saying, well, that's too bad, they can't participate, I try to turn it around to the client or to my team and say, well, do we want to miss out on what we might be able to learn from this person anyway? And if they can only do a 30-minute interview versus an hour and a half and do a homework, it's about saying, do we really want to miss out on what this person might give us, given the challenges that we know there are in doing this kind of research? So overall, it's really being guided by your kind of research question and the phenomena that you're trying to understand. That really comes first, and the kind of plan for the research, the methods, the sample, all of that is really a means to an end and something to be flexible about in order to reach that North Star, which is learning about your research topic. So that means, kind of as I've been saying, you know, being flexible about exactly who it's going to be and how many, when the research will be conducted, what the actual methods will look like, and what's asked of the participants. Another kind of thing that this can look like, doing again some research with these remote workers and people who were really busy. We tried to have them sit down, you know, for an hour or more of just interview time, but people were getting phone calls and getting pulled away by their jobs that they still had to do. And of course, we're in no place to kind of tell them to stop or to not do that. We're kind of joining them in their homes on their days. And so we found ourselves as researchers, you know, carrying out these interstitial interviews and just talking to them in the spare moments between the day, whether it was over lunch or I had one participant came and picked me up as she was dropping off her daughter to school, and we're talking in the car, and she's telling me things. But ultimately, I think it was good to see them throughout their day and how they got work done. And it was good to have it be a bit less structured and kind of a pure interview, if you will. There was a question for Gabby about like what to do if someone on email is positive about participating and then goes unresponsive. This was another study that we were doing, and I actually had a colleague who went to California, to LA, to see a woman who was using this video device. And we had this, you know, she had said yes to participating, and then stopped responding to emails, stopped responding to text, calls. We just couldn't get through to her. But again, we had a very limited set of companies that we could talk to. And so we booked the flight basically when she said yes. And so my colleague still went out there. Luckily, when it's an office, you know the address. And so still the day of, the woman hadn't really gotten back in touch with us to say, yes, this works fine. So I was on the phone with my colleague. I said, you know, just show up at the office. If she tells you to come back tomorrow, that's fine. So she showed up at the office. That was exactly what happened. The woman was a bit surprised, but still happy to participate, and asked her to come back again the next day. And she did, and it was fine. I was going to see her colleague as well, and had the same thing happen in Chicago, basically, where someone that she manages hadn't been responsive. But I went to the office, and I felt a bit like a spy, kind of trying to get in past reception without the proper authorization until I got up to the office. And at that point, this person wasn't really expecting me at all. But when I explained the research, she said, "Oh yeah, I think I heard something about that." And we had a 30-minute interview, and I left. But ultimately, we were able to include that company in the study because we'd learned a bit about how they were using it, even if it kind of wasn't how we would have set it up and asked for it. I think that can all sound great when you have when it's just you, and as a researcher you can say, great, a bit of uncertainty, that's fun, but what about when you have stakeholders, whether those are clients or internal stakeholders along for the ride? I think it's a lot harder to embrace the uncertainty and the unexpected. I think it's all about managing expectations. The first thing is kind of thinking about limiting attendance, maybe do a pilot interview, or if you can do some of the research near their office or near an HQ, it can kind of lower the stakes if and when the unexpected happens, and if there's anything that goes wrong. A big part of what we do at Stripe, and I think of kind of a lot of where research is headed, is the way that findings are shared back kind of in real time. And so if people can't attend, sharing video highlights the day of, or even having client participants who were able to come record a video of what they learned, and share that back on Slack or somewhere else. Doing an email newsletter. These are all things that we've experimented to try to bring people who can't actually attend into have the feeling of kind of engagement with research as it happens, and not just when they get something shared back. And if the attendance is something that you want, if it's something that needs to happen, I think kind of communicating and explaining that there is this level of uncertainty, having a backup plan and some way to use your time together productively if you get a kind of last minute cancellation, or if plans need to change last minute. Ultimately, trust was a key theme in Gabby's research. In that case, often with her participants. I think for me, what I've really realized is it's a necessary component of the kind of stakeholder and researcher relationship when you're doing this kind of research. When there's trust, you can be flexible about having a range of the number of participants you're going to have, rather than a set number that kind of legally must be fulfilled. Flexibility on timing, trying to start early or going a bit later if necessary, and really learning from the kind of range of experiences and people, rather than a kind of cookie cutter idea of what you're going to go out there and see. And when there is that trust, it makes it work. And if not, still possible, but it's going to kind of go the hard way. To wrap up, I think doing this research with B2B has really helped me in how I think about research more broadly, and a few lessons have really come through. One is the aspect of having a North Star and letting everything else be in service of that. So I think we can often be purists about our methods or our sample, or even the timeline of the project and the deliverables. All of those things are really in service of learning about the phenomena, getting meaningful insights about our research questions, and fulfilling the project objectives. So, I think they should always be flexible, or at least up for a discussion about what needs to change in order to make sure those learnings are coming in. Lesson 2 is just this kind of trick of framing from, do people fit the criteria and the research plan, to talking about, do we want to miss what we might be able to learn from them? Kind of when you make it about the value that person might add, I think it's much harder to disqualify them. And then just embracing the unexpected and the unpredictable. So I think there are times when we need to kind of outline our brief as it is on the left here, But the more we think about kind of when is that really necessary and when is it constricting us and actually preventing us from learning about the phenomena that we want to understand. So when can we kind of free ourselves and be a bit more flexible? So that's everything from me, and yeah, I look forward to some of your questions.
Thanks, Calen. So we have some pending questions from previously, but I'm going to wait for people to just ask you some specific questions. And then if we have time, we can answer them. Guys, if you don't mind, I think it is much easier if you raise your hand or if you do a Q&A. It'll be harder for me to follow the chat as well as the other two methods. So please post your question on the Q&A or raise your hand. Just waiting.
Can I ask Calen a question to start with while we'll type? Calen, I would like to hear from you about the timing. So I had a lot of time, so I could build that trust relationship. How it is for you that you probably have your deliverables on your shoulder, much tighter deadlines.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. I think it's also kind of, you know, for me, it's also the only way I've really worked and done research. I think and I'm sure kind of a lot of what you described is similar when you have tight deadlines, because you were saying that, you know, people expected some insights right away, and I think that's often I think we've moved more and more towards giving those kind of snippets and quick hunches and kind of nuggets as we go, rather than kind of saving everything and then building up for some big presentation. And so, you know, for example, on this last project that we've been doing about the kind of low friction collaboration, we just did a couple of slides for each person, just describing kind of who they were and what it was that they were using, and shared those out really like as we completed the interviews. And it also means now, as we go into our analysis and kind of final report writing, we have that to pull from. And so I think it's mostly a matter of trying to capture things and produce some outputs, even if they're not polished and finished, as we go. And then, of course, like intense periods of analysis and report writing where all of that needs to happen in a couple of weeks. I think that's also something that for us has been one of the hardest parts about going remote, is not being able to kind of get in that war room style environment to just get that alignment and jump into report writing. So that's been something we've been learning how to do remote from each other.
Cool. So we have lots of questions coming through now. We have one question from Drishti, which is, what are the industries that you usually conduct research for? And does the research method change from industry to industry?
Yeah, so most of my experience has been on like collaborative technologies itself. When it hasn't been that, it's still mostly been in the kind of technology that people use while working. So some hardware in terms of kind of chip processors and like the video device that I mentioned. So I really have experience with knowledge workers trying to understand how they collaborate and the tools that they use. And that's where the majority of my projects have fallen. As a company, we've done some stuff more in kind of manufacturing and resources, like natural resources. So we did some work with welders and stuff on people on gas rigs and things like that. And I think that it is very different to get out into the field and kind of go along with someone who is doing welding or working on an oil rig. But I think the lessons are really similar in terms of the flexibility, because ultimately what remains the same is you're on their turf and you're on their time. And that's true no matter what. And it always means that we as researchers need to be much more flexible to what works for our participants, compared to in consumer research when we can be a little bit more demanding, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. And we have another question. Did you try any other methods other than interviews to gain insight? And if so, what did you find works?
Yes, as I mentioned, like for us, we always try to do something beyond interviewing. And so when we could go and see people in person, the remote workers study, for example, we spent 2 or 3 days with the people that we met. And so we'd stay nearby and then go meet them in the morning as they started their day and stay with them throughout their workday, and, you know, potentially even a little bit longer. And, you know, in those instances, we're really trying to be a fly on the wall as much as possible, other than when we're kind of getting bits of interview, and being able to watch someone, you know, on a call as they're muting and unmuting themselves, or as they're, you know, back channeling and messaging someone who's on the call about someone or something else, is those are things that you can't get really from an interview. You have to watch them do it, and for us, that's really the value of ethnographic methods and of doing observation. I think the other thing that's related that we've done is using film for observation. So kind of having them set up a camera and record themselves working. And one thing that was particularly fun was doing kind of time lapses, so speeding up people as they were in meetings. And, you know, I had one person who was on a chair with wheels, and you could see how he started his meeting like very close to the screen, and then as I think there was a slight slant on his floor, so as he did the meeting, by the end of it he was very far away from his desk and could barely reach his computer, and you saw it in the time lapse. So video as well has been useful for capturing some of those more observational findings.
Cool. So I think we have time for at least one raised hand, and then we'll see what we have time for. I'm going to ask Janine to talk. Sorry.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Just wondering, are you working within an agile Scrum setting and participating in all the ceremonies attached to them?
So yeah, we don't work in with like an agile method in our research, because we're usually, you know, as external vendors to our clients, we tend to be a bit siloed off to do the research and then deliver the findings. Sometimes we fit into, you know, the end of our research project might be a design sprint that then goes off of, you know, us presenting a few personas or key insights or a user journey. But that's typically at the end of a project that takes us a couple of weeks and is all really focused on the research.
Cool. Thank you. I think we have, Anya, if you think we have some more time, I can ask some more generic questions that maybe one of you or both of you can answer.
Yeah, why don't we go for like 2, 3, just see.
Okay. So one question, I'm going to open it to both of you. It's from Monica. B2B products have 2 customer groups, buyers and end users. How important is it to incorporate both into projects, and how do you do that? Who wants to answer? Go for it, Calen.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a good question. And like typically for me, whenever you're talking about technology platforms used for work, you really do have this distinction between someone who's making decisions for the company and all of the end users. I think if I'm on a project where we're trying to understand, you know, the strengths and weaknesses of a particular platform, then I would say it is like absolutely essential to have both those decision makers and end users included. Otherwise, the risk of missing kind of a key perspective is too high. But I wouldn't say it's always necessary, because sometimes the goal is to understand what decision makers are looking for, or what the pain points are in particular usage of features of end users, or understand how end users are using something regardless of the intention of a decision maker when it was brought on. So I think if the end objective is something that really is just oriented towards one of those two groups, I wouldn't say like you must include the other group by default.
Cool. Gabby, do you want to add?
Yeah, so for me, it's fairly similar. So obviously the team has like levels, and I would say that I would work with the highest decision maker alongside my PM to understand priorities and to set the roadmap. So at Babylon, we do work with Agile, so we have 2 weeks cycles. And for the senior stakeholders, that's how they help us. And for the day-to-day, the more hands-on, it's when I tend to go deeper with the team. So obviously, I don't get to set the same rituals with senior stakeholders, but only when I have relevant updates and when I want to include the senior stakeholder in the decision-making process. As being more of like, he is an active part of what we are building because he understands the overall goals of the team, but he doesn't get to make decisions about how the things are going to be in the tool, because he's not going to be the first person using it in my case, which is fairly similar to what Calen has described as well.
I have a question as well. So in my experience, I think B2B tends to be somehow deprioritized depending on like who's actually bringing the money, whether it's end users versus whether it's internal users or other business users. So have you ever had a struggle with getting things done after the research, after all the hard work? Who wants to answer first? I hope that makes sense.
I can say I have a take on that. I don't think it's only a matter of like who brings in the money, but it's also about the team resources, right? So everything was always targeted to what are our powers, what's the capability of our team. And if we detected something that we were not able to deliver because we don't have the team resources to do so, I would just, as a researcher, make sure that I identify who else in the company, that B2B scenario, has the power and influence to tackle that particular problem, and make sure that they are also aware of this problem. Because even if things don't get done now, they also understand the problem, and they also understand the value of investing their time in building it. It happened several times throughout the research. And that's also powerful for us as researchers, because in my case, I was in a particular squad that's part of a bigger tribe. And because I came across several of those features that we didn't have the resources to build, but then I would just go and talk to this other PM and go and talk to this other PM. Suddenly, all these other squads started reaching out like, oh my God, we need a researcher. Look at what the researcher does. Like, they translate these problems to us. And I got involved in some tactical projects that they were working on, which was very interesting because it made sense full circle to the tool that I was helping research.
Cool. Do you want to add to that, or I can move on to the next question?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that.
Fine. So this one is an interesting question as well by Bernard. Do you ever have an issue with clients not believing observational research methods and their outputs? On a previous project, he spent 2 to 3 weeks doing observational research, which showed the technology being built would not work for the users, and the client disagreed. Any wise words?
It's interesting. I think we don't tend to have a issue with like observational research being believed or not. I think for us, the challenge is often just trying to sell it in the first place and convince people that it's necessary from the beginning, because often it does mean more time, and you know, you need to go to the setting, or it just, you know, it complicates things. And I think a lot of people feel that you know, just kind of, since it, you know, interviews are more time efficient, that they get the job done, and it's fine. I think for us, what helps is to always try to combine where kind of observational research meets how people describe their own experiences, and it's, you know, it's also always a matter of where the two are in tension, like not portraying people as being dishonest or ignorant of their own behavior. I think it's about trying to understand why people say the things they do, and then also why certain things are in behavior. And I think if the explanation that you provide as a researcher is able to address both of those things, both what you observe somebody doing and how they kind of express their experiences and their views in their own words, that becomes a lot harder to dismiss, versus I think it's a lot easier to say, oh, well, that's just what somebody said, or, oh, well, they said something different and you're saying that they did this. So I think, yeah, when the two are in tension, getting an explanation and an understanding that manages to explain both is often the best approach.
Gabby, do you want to add to that?
I don't have much to add because I was building for an internal product. So yeah, we didn't have this setup that would make things harder. But maybe, so for a particular pain point in which we just wanted to prove things like strongly to senior stakeholders who tend to be a little bit more conservative when putting in resources into things and when looking into research outputs, I just went to the classic, let's just record people talking about things. And then I just recorded my user taking me through each step of the journey that she was going, to the point that when I played it back to them, I could see their face changing from being skeptical to feeling like embarrassed because the experience was so bad and we needed to fix it. And then it was like, yeah, it was a magic moment. It was powerful. So just using these resources to help your stakeholders or clients to buy in can be powerful.
Cool. One final question, guys. You might have a quick tip. We have someone asking about the current lockdown and social distancing and how that's affected user research in your respective organizations, and especially with building trust.
Can I just clarify, if possible, I don't know if the person can comment again, but do they mean more trust with respondents or trust with clients?
Respondents, with participants, and like in a remote setup. So the exact words say, any tips for building trust and observing participants remotely?
I mean, for us, we've it's really been a change, going from not doing any remote research to doing only remote research. I mean, perhaps it won't be a surprise given the kind of nature of my presentation. I'm really of the mindset that you just need to take advantage of the advantages that there are and kind of let some of the downsides be. And so, you know, it's really been wonderful for us to be able to include people in research from all over the world. When in the past, you know, we had to go to a certain city and hope that that got us what we needed. You know, as well, kind of, I think a lot of us have appreciated doing research from the comfort of our own homes and being able to hop on an interview and hop off of it. It lets you do kind of more in a day, and you obviously gain a lot of time that you would have lost in travel. I think in terms of participants and trust, like, I find that people are, you know, like everyone else and like ourselves, they're getting used to this way of interacting. And so in a way, they're doing something maybe much more familiar to them than an interview or research session would be in person prior to the pandemic. And so I haven't felt like a particular lack of kind of trust and rapport. I think it's a familiar behavior, but observing people is a real challenge. I haven't kind of figured that out. You know, screen sharing is one thing, video is okay, but yeah, a lot of things are really difficult. But you know, I think if I had a project coming up where that was really important, I think trying to get like the recorded video of the activity in advance and use that for observation would probably be first and foremost in my arsenal.
Gabby?
Yeah, same. There's nothing more to add. I think Calen discovered it really well. Not doing B2B research in Babylon anymore. I moved teams, but it's the same story. Like, there's up to a certain extent that we can do, but now we have more access to people who are in locations where it was more difficult to do research. Observation is really difficult. Also, the interaction with mobile devices is very different because, you know, it requires a particular setup in order to see people using their phones. But I think, like, just being adaptive, and like as we also do more of it, we also will probably learn how to hack things and be more creative of how we use technology in our favor.
Awesome. I think I'm going to stop now and Anya to take over.
Unmuting, the old problem. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for coming and sharing your talks with us. That was super great, and it was, yeah, fabulous to have you. And also to our attendees from wherever you logged on and listened and asked questions. So do get in touch with us, tell us what you thought of the event, do that on Twitter, or get in touch on LinkedIn with us if you like. And yeah, if you want to speak, do get in touch as well. So thanks again for everyone, and have a good evening. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Bye.